conventions. So depreciation conventions. So a depreciation convention, kind of weird. Like I said, I'm not talking about a convention where you go and you meet with people and you network and all that stuff. So conventions have to do with when you start depreciating an asset and when you stop depreciating an asset. And there are 3 different types of conventions. So we have, and I'm not going to take them in the order that they have them in the book. I'm going to take them in a different order. I'm going to go from easiest to hardest. So for conventions, we have the half-year convention. We have the mid-quarter convention. And we have the mid-month convention. Which means, depending upon when you purchase an asset will determine when we start depreciating it. If you're using the mid-month convention, you're going to start depreciating it in the middle of the month that you purchased it. The 15th of whatever month that is. Okay? So the mid-month is why I'm not going to go in order, because I think the mid-month is the easiest to understand. So again, mid-month convention treats all property placed in service during any month as being placed in service at the midpoint of that month. Whatever the middle date is of that month. Mid-quarter convention, I guess I'll read through these and I'll go that way. Mid-quarter convention treats all property placed in service during a quarter of a tax year as though it was placed in service at the middle of that quarter. So if it was placed in service January 1st, that's the first quarter. The middle of that quarter is February 15th. It's as though it was placed in service on February 15th. That's mid-quarter. Half-year convention treats all property placed in service during a year as being placed in service at the midpoint of that year. So if you're using the half-year convention, that your assets are placed in service as of July 1st. Okay, so mid-month, again, 15th of the month. Mid-quarter, middle of the quarter. So for mid-month, there are 12 different options for when it could be, right? For mid-quarter, there are 4 different options. For half year, it's the middle of the year. There's only one option. Let's just say July 1st. Half year convention. So it doesn't matter if you have to use the half year convention for an asset that you purchased on December 31st, you're going to treat it as though you placed it in service July 1st. Doesn't matter that you didn't even own it then. Right? It's going to be treated as though it was placed in service July 1st. Again, if you have an asset that you placed in service April 2nd, and you have to use the mid-quarter convention for that asset, you're going to place it, it's going to be treated as though it was placed in service, what's the middle of the second quarter? May 15th. Okay? Kind of weird. Right? It's a little bit weird because it really doesn't, very rarely are you, for tax purposes, are you placing an asset, are you starting to depreciate an asset on the same day that you actually placed it in service? Right? We're going to go through when we use each of these, what the rules are for using them. You don't get to choose which one you use. Which one you use is determined for you. So, and I'm going to start with, I'm going to come back to half year and mid-quarter. I'm going to start with the easy one, which is mid-month. Mid-month conventions is used only for real property that has a 27 and a half, 31 and a half, or 39-year life. So this is only for real property. So again, 27 and a half, I'm just going to say 27 and a half or 39 years because, like I said, we don't really use the 31 and a half year one anymore. But so if you purchase a residential apartment building on July 7th is when you close on it, you are going to start to depreciate it as of July 15th. That's when the depreciation will start on that building. Okay, so you will have just a part year depreciation in the first year, right? But it also applies to the last year in which you depreciate the building. So if you sell it March 7th of another year, you're going to stop depreciating it on March 15th. So whatever convention you use to start out with is the same convention you use to end with. You stick with that convention. So again, you purchase let's say you purchase an office building, which would be a 39-year property. You purchase the office building on November 13th. You're going to start to depreciate. It's going to go on the tax return as starting to depreciate as of November 15th. You then turn around and you sell it a couple of years later, but you sell it March 31st. The depreciation is going to end as of March 15th. So does that make sense? The year that you, and every other year you're depreciating it for the whole year. Yeah. You still use the mid, so you'll use the mid-month if it's real property, November 15th. Doesn't matter if it was before or after that date. If it falls within that month, it starts the middle of the month. Okay? So that's the mid-month. Like I said, it's only real property. So we do not use, this one's easy. We do not use the mid-quarter or the half-year convention for real property. This is the only convention we use for real property. So they mentioned here, I'll go back to the, so like I said, you'll have partial depreciation in the year that you purchase and in the year that you sell, but then the other intervening years, you'll just take a full year's worth of depreciation on those years. All right. The half-year convention. This is used the most often. It only applies to personal property. Both of these only apply to personal property. I didn't do this very well. Which again, does not mean personal use property. It just means it's not real estate. So anything other than real estate. It is the most used convention. 1/2 of the depreciation is taken in the first year. 1/2 of the depreciation is taken in the last year because you're starting July 1st, you're ending June 30th. All personal property is the convention that we use for all personal property is the half-year convention, unless we have to use the mid-quarter convention. And I'm going to tell you when we have to use the mid-quarter convention. It's probably the more complicated one to understand. But you would always use this unless you're required to use the mid-quarter convention. So if you're trying to determine which convention that you have to use, first question you ask is it real property or is it personal property? If it's real property, we're going to use the mid-month convention. End of story, that's it. If it's personal property, then we have to ask ourselves some other questions. Next question is, do we have to use the mid-quarter convention? If the answer is no, we're going to use the half-year convention. Okay? I'll go through when we have to use the mid-quarter convention, but half-year is the default unless we have to use the mid-quarter convention. Again, all personal property unless we're required to use the mid-quarter convention. So for example, Cal purchased the following assets during the tax year. So January 6th, he got $7,400 of equipment. May 4th, a truck worth $20,000. December 1st, $2,000 for equipment. He is going to depreciate all of that property based on the half-year convention. So in the first year, even though this was in January and this was in December, he's still going to take half a year of depreciation on all of those assets. Okay? Now keep in mind, so the equipment is 7-year property, the truck is 5-year property, the equipment is 7-year property. So the class lives for these differ, but the starting date for depreciation is going to be the same for all of them, right? Even though he purchased the asset at different times, he takes a half year of depreciation, and in the year that he disposes of it, he's going to take a half year of depreciation, regardless of when he disposes of each of these, right? Maybe he gets rid of the equipment in April, gets rid of the truck in November one year, gets rid of the other equipment in January. It's all going to end as of the middle of the year, okay? So we have to determine, okay, that's pretty easy too. We're going to use this unless we have to use that mid-quarter convention. So when do we have to use the mid-quarter convention? That's the million-dollar question. We have to use this, and again, mid-quarter means we're going to start it, the depreciation, in the middle of whatever quarter in which we purchase it, okay? And that's based on an individual basis. So like if we had to use the mid-quarter convention for these assets, then we would start depreciating this equipment as of February 15th, this equipment as of May 15th, this equipment as of November 15th, because they were all purchased in different quarters, right? So that's if we have to use the mid-quarter convention for those. We have to use it if we place more than 40% of our personal property in service during the last quarter of the tax year. So what we have to, and that's only personal property. So what we have to do is add up all of the personal property that we purchased. So in this case, erase this. In this instance, we've got January 6th, May 4th, and December 1st. What we do is add up, this is all personal property. We're not going to include any real property here. So if we bought real property during the same year, we're not going to include this in the calculation. Okay, we're just going to do the personal property. So 7,400, 20,000, 2,000. So what do we have? 29,400. We'll take that. Then we're going to total up all of the property that we purchased in the last quarter. So in this case, we purchased $2,000 of property in the last quarter. So if we figure out, what percentage that is of the total, so what, 2,000 divided by 29,400, we should be able to do this in our heads, right? This is not more than 40% of our total. So 2,000 divided by 29,400 is 6.8%. Okay, so 6.8% of our personal property was purchased during the last quarter in this instance. This means we do not have to use the mid-quarter convention. We can use the half-year convention. Now, if, however, let's change it up a little bit. Let's say this was purchased October 15th. Now, this is going to change our percentage. Because now 22,000 was purchased in the last quarter, right? Of our total personal property, 22,000. So divided by 29,400. Now 74.8% was purchased during the last quarter of the year. Now we have to use the mid-quarter convention. We apply it, though, on an individual asset basis. So that means that this equipment, we're going to start depreciating that on February 15th. If we have to use the mid-quarter convention, this one we will start on February 15th, our depreciation, because it was purchased in the first quarter. This, we're going to start, both of these, we're going to start November 15th. Because they were purchased in the last quarter, the middle of the quarter in which they were purchased. So again, when more than 40% of the personal property assets were purchased in the fourth quarter, then we're going to use the mid-quarter convention. The reason for this is, imagine a world where you could just use the half-year convention for all of your assets. You buy everything on December 31st. You get to depreciate all of it for half a year, even though you didn't really own it. You only owned it on the last day of the year. This is to prevent people from taking more depreciation than essentially they're entitled to in that first year. So does that make sense? So if I bought all of my assets right at the end of the year, I bought $20,000 worth of assets at the end of the year, and I get to depreciate that first year. I get full half a year's worth of depreciation in that first year. I'm getting more of a deduction that I'm really entitled to that first year. I can take advantage of that, right? So this helps to mitigate that whole that scheme. So they did the same example here. Same facts as before, but now that truck, instead of being purchased, I used October 15th, they put November 5th. Now 75% of the assets were purchased in that last quarter. So in order to determine, again, so first thing you're going to do, let me see if I can think this through in steps. So first question, is it real property or personal? First question. So if it's real, then you're going to use the mid-month convention for that real property. Okay? You're going to use it for the real property. The personal property, you're going to use either the half year or the mid-quarter convention. So if it's real, mid-month. If it's personal, which simply means it's not real, right? It's not real property. If it's personal, you're going to check to see if, did you purchase, let me think about this, more than 40% personal property purchased in fourth quarter. Was more than 40% of the personal property purchased in the fourth quarter. So you do that by totaling up all the personal property and then totaling up everything that was purchased in the fourth quarter. And then you divide everything that was purchased in the fourth quarter by everything that was purchased in the year to determine what that percentage is. what percentage of that was purchased in the fourth quarter. So if it's yes, no. If it's no, easy. We're going to use, half year is what we're going to use. I don't know what that says. Half what? We're going to use the half year convention. If it's yes, we're going to use the mid-quarter convention. What do you think? What's the hardest part of that? What do I need to go through again? Last part is the method. Let's do another scenario. Let's make up something else. Let's say we have, so on January 7th, we purchased land for $7,000. On March 14th, we purchased a truck for $15,000. Let's see, 7/12, we purchased equipment for $15,000, and 10/14, we purchased more equipment for $12,000, and then November 7th, we purchased another truck for $27,000. And then let's say December 8th, we purchased a building for $52,000. All right. So this is real property. This is real property. This we're going to use the mid-month. This, we're not going to depreciate this because it's land, right? So we're not going to depreciate it. We will put it on the tax return, but we'll list it as not depreciable. You know, that it's land. There, in the tax software, they have specific asset classifications for land, and it just doesn't get depreciated. All right, so for purposes of determining whether we can use the half, so real or personal, real we're going to use the mid-month, personal, the rest of this personal property. Now we have to determine, was more than 40% of that personal property purchased in the fourth quarter? All right, so what we have to do is we got to add all of this up. So we've got, what, 30, 42, 52, 62, 69,000 total, right? Did I get that right? So 69,000 total of personal property. We're not going to include the value of the building or the land in that. We're only going to total up the personal property. Now we need to total up everything that was of that personal property. How much was purchased in the last quarter? These two items were. That's 39,000. We're going to take 39,000, divide it by 69,000 to determine the percentage of our personal property that was purchased in the last quarter. So 56%. 56% of our personal property was purchased in the last quarter. That means we have to use the mid-quarter convention for our personal property. So if we have to use the mid-quarter, now we've established we have to use the mid-quarter convention. So when are we going to start depreciating these? So the truck was bought in the first quarter, March 14th. The middle of the first quarter is February 15th, middle of February. The equipment was bought in the, what is that, the third quarter, July. So we're going to start depreciating that the middle of the third quarter, 8/15. This equipment was purchased in the fourth quarter, so we're going to start depreciating that the middle of the fourth quarter, 11/15. The truck as well was purchased in the fourth quarter, so we're also going to start depreciating that 11/15. Yes? No? Okay. All right. I told you, it's kind of weird. It's completely foreign. All right, so we've gone through, figured out, what our basis is. We talked about asset class lives, which again, that's pretty easy. They just tell us what we're going to use for our asset class life. We got to determine which convention we're going to use. And by the way, the software also does that for you, because you enter in when something was purchased and you tell it if it was like based on what it is, it knows if it's real property or personal property, right? And so it will total everything up and do that for you. Software will, but you have some homework problems that won't. You got to do it. And your tax return problem probably as well. I can't remember off the top of my head. But in practice, the software does that for you. Okay. Questions on convention? All right.